And now, a passage from Embassy to the Eastern Courts of Cochin-China, Siam, and Muscat by Edmund Roberts, from Chapter 13. After enduring several days of rainy and squally weather, we weighed anchor and proceeded towards Turan Bay on the northern coast of Cochin-China, being the nearest and best point to hold communication with the capital, called Hue, from which it is distant about 50 miles, it being impossible to anchor off the bar of Hue during the northeast monsoon. The weather during the passage, with the exception of one day, was misty or rainy, and on the first day of January 1833 we found ourselves off the Bay of Turan. But the weather was very thick, with a heavy sea running, and the wind shifting nearly every half hour from northwest to northeast. Finding it unsafe to run nearer to the land, we endeavored to hold our station as well as we could till the weather cleared up sufficiently to see our way in. But it continued nearly the same till the 5th, the wind remaining most of the time in the northwest quarter. Daily we lost ground by contrary winds, and a strong current setting to the southward and eastward along the coast. The very mountainous land about the bay was first lost sight of. In 2 or 3 days, following the group of islands called Champella or Chamcalau, afterward the island of False Champella, finding ourselves at length drifted down to Pulo Cambir, and losing ground on every tack, we were under the unpleasant necessity of bearing away for the most suitable and nearest harbor, which was done at sunset on the 5th, calculating the distance to the united harbors of Shundai, Vungchau, and Vunglam, represented by Horsburgh, to be very safe, and having sufficient depth of water, at 120 miles. The wind during most of the night was light from the northeast, and we had run, by the log accurately kept, at 7 the next morning, a distance not exceeding 70 to 75 miles. At daybreak, the ship's head was directed towards the coast, but not seeing any very conspicuous landmarks, we kept along shore till 8, having within an hour passed an island and a group of small jagged rocks standing so near the coast that we at first supposed the island to be part of the mainland. It was, however, Pulo Cambir, lying to the north of our port of destination. Seeing to the southward of us a large fleet of fishing boats, a very high conical mountain, which we supposed must be Mount Epervier, and the land extending far to the eastward, which we were satisfied must be Cape Avarella or Pagoda Cape, and at the same time discovering the island of Magnia, a short distance to the southward of the harbor, we stood boldly in, and at 12 came to anchor in 6½ fathoms water, in the fine harbor of Vunglam, the village of that name bearing to the southwest, distant 1.5 miles, and within 3/4 of a mile a small uninhabited and unnamed island bearing south, called by us Peacock Island. The beautiful harbor of Vungchau being open to our view in the northeast, 2 miles distant, and the harbor or roadstead of Shundai with Nest Island bearing east about the same distance. It will be seen by the distance per log that we were currented along in 15 hours 50 miles, nearly equal to 3½ miles per hour. To the southward of Cambir lies a sand beach extending up a rising ground, which, together with a more extensive plot near the southern entrance, but to the southward of the island of Magnia, assist as a leading mark in running in. This is truly one of the finest harbors in the world, and free from all obstructions, save a rock, called the Buoy Rock, within 1½ miles of our anchorage, the top of which is above water. The country around is apparently well cultivated, being laid out in small patches resembling gardens. It is beautifully picturesque and bold, frequently running into hills, from 1 to 1,500 feet high, the verdure of which extends in many places to the water's edge. The hand of the workman has here been busy on every spot susceptible of cultivation. Villages were seen among the palm trees near the sandy beaches, and on the cultivated swells of land for many miles around us. In the afternoon of the day on which we anchored, an old man came on board. Though raggedly dressed and dirty, he appeared to be somewhat superior to the fishermen who brought him off. Not being offered a seat at first, he seemed rather disconcerted and expressed a desire to leave. But having learned that he was an official personage, he was invited down to the gun deck, and there seated. Being interrogated more particularly in relation to his rank in the village, he stated himself to be a keep-two, literally assistant keeper, of Vunglam and King Chow, and the principal person in the village, but that he had a superior or commandant at Shundai, under whom is also another officer of equal rank with himself. In reply to questions about the names of places, he said that the southernmost or principal town or village was called Shundai, that the central one, opposite which we lay, is Vung Lam, that the most northern is Vung Chau. Shundai, he said, formed one part, and Vung Lam and Vung Chau another. He was asked whether there were any fortifications on shore, and it was explained to him that a salute would be fired in honor of the king if there were any guns on shore to return it. He said there was no fortification at Vung Lam, but that there was a fort at Shundai. He was then informed that on the next morning a salute would be fired, which was accordingly done with 13 guns. Upon inquiring whether the vessel was come to trade or for public business, he was informed that she was a ship of war sent out by the President of the United States, containing a special envoy with a letter for the King of Cochin-China. It was explained to him also that the envoy wished to go to the capital as speedily as possible, in order to have an audience and to present the President's letter. He seemed desirous to have some written paper which he might present to his superior, but no such paper was in readiness for him. It was told him that the special agent would himself write to the capital to announce his arrival and desire an audience. In order to obtain a better idea of what measures would be requisite to expedite the application to Hui, various questions were asked respecting the government, etc. He stated that the government of Shundai and its dependencies are immediately subordinate to the supreme provincial government of Fuyan or Fuyen, that the provincial government consists of a Tongdok or governor who presides over 2 provinces and is now in the adjoining province to the north, a Po-cheng-su or treasurer and sub-governor, and Ao-tat-su or judge, and that the seat of government is within a day's journey. The name of the capital, he said, is Tua-Tien-Pu. That of the king is Ming-Meng. Speaking of the capital, he said that the ship might return northward to it in 3 or 4 days. Attention to other points prevented any reply being made to this remark at the time, and it was afterward forgotten. He inquired the name of the envoy and the number of men on board. He then took leave after having drunk a little wine. The old man was throughout lively and cheerful. As he wrote Chinese pretty well, it was easy to hold intercourse with him. January 6th. Towards evening, a large party came on board consisting of the old headman of Vung Lam, who visited us yesterday, 2 persons dispatched by the commandant of Shundai, and 2 Chinese interpreters, with a number of attendants anxious to satisfy their curiosity, the Chinese being able to speak the Mandarin as well as their own provincial dialect, that of Canton. Conversation was kept up with greater facility than yesterday, little of it being held in writing. They stated that 2 officers of the 9th rank, deputed by the chiefs of the provincial government, had arrived about noon, and had sent them to ascertain where the ship was from and what was the object in coming. They were answered that she was a ship of war, and sent by the President of the United States, and that she brought a special envoy bearing a letter to the King of Cochin-China. They were told also that the envoy wished to repair speedily to the capital, and intended to send a letter himself to announce his arrival. They requested a written paper to enable them to report to their superiors. The following paper was therefore given them in Chinese and English. After receiving it, they returned to the shore. This is a ship of war of the United States of America. This ship is called the Peacock. The captain's name is David Geisinger. This ship has been sent here by the President of the United States, he wishing to form a treaty of friendly intercourse with the King of Cochin-China. There is on board the ship a special envoy, Edmund Roberts, bearing a letter from the President of the United States, which he is to present personally to the King of Cochin-China. The number of persons on board, including both officers and men, is 166. The ship at first intended going into Tonkin Bay, but not being able on account of the current, she came here. January 6, 1833. Before they left, inquiries were made respecting provisions, and they were told that it was desirable they should tell the people to bring things off to the ship to sell. They replied that the market was open to go and purchase anything. On this occasion, as well as yesterday, no restriction was imposed on our visiting the shore, although to prevent offense being taken, they were informed that we should do so. January 7th. This morning, the same party as yesterday came off again. with the addition of the 2 deputies from the seat of government and their retinue, consisting of umbrella-bearers, trumpeters, and sword-bearers. The 2 deputies appeared anxious to make as much as possible of themselves. They ran over various questions of the same nature as those put by their precursors, which having been briefly answered, they were told that the envoy was then preparing a despatch for the king, and that in about an hour it would be taken on shore by a naval officer, when they must be prepared to receive and forward it immediately to the capital of the province, or wherever else it might be necessary for them to send it in the first instance. They then entered upon a number of impertinent queries, such as whether there were any presents for the king, what were the contents of the letter to him, asking to see a copy of the envoy's dispatch to the capital, and the envoy and captain's commissions. In all these inquiries they were immediately checked, and with some difficulty brought to answer the questions whether they were willing to receive and forward the dispatch or not. Having answered in the affirmative, they were told that was satisfactory, that the despatch was being completed, that in the meanwhile they should return and make preparations to receive the officer who bore it. The subject of provisions, and particularly water, was again introduced, but nothing satisfactory was elicited in reply. The market, they said, was open. A little after noon, the dispatch was carried on shore by Lieutenant Brent. It was a letter in the form of a Chinese memorial, from the envoy to the king of Cochin-China, and was written both in Chinese and English. The following is a copy. To His Majesty, the King of Cochin-China, the undersigned Edmund Roberts has the honor to inform your Majesty that Andrew Jackson, President of the United States of America, being desirous of opening a friendly intercourse with the King of Cochin-China, has dispatched the United States ship of war Peacock, commanded by Captain David Geisinger, to your Majesty's dominions. The President of the United States of America has dispatched the undersigned, his special envoy, to your Majesty's court, entrusting him with a letter to your Majesty, and has clothed him with full power to treat with your Majesty for the important objects which the President of the United States has in view. He therefore requests that your Majesty will grant him an interview with the least possible loss of time. It was the intention of the commander of the said United States ship of war to have entered the Bay of Tiran, but having been driven from thence after repeated attempts by adverse winds and currents, he has been compelled at length to enter this port. As contrary winds and currents now prevail, it is rendered impossible for the envoy to proceed to Tiran Bay. The undersigned must therefore await your Majesty's answer here. Dated on board the United States ship Peacock in Vung Lam Roads, province of Fuyan, Cochin-China, the 7th day of January A.D. 1833, the 57th year of independence, signed Edmund Roberts. Not being well acquainted with the Cochin-Chinese forms, the letter was simply folded up in paper and sealed, being enclosed in vellum and addressed to His Majesty, the King of Cochin-China, etc., etc., etc. If you enjoy my content and want to support the channel, please head on over to Patreon. Link is in the description below. Your support would be deeply appreciated and would really help the channel. Thank you.